In this video I'm going to be installing Stahlbus bleeders on my front brake, rear brake and clutch. So I purchased Stahlbus bleeders for my front brake, rear brake and clutch. You should note that they're all different sizes, so you need to be careful what size you order. I'm showing here the correct sizes for my 2017 KTM 250EXC. You should also note that the caps are sold separately. This is an M10 size banjo style fitting, and they're supplied with the necessary washers for installation. One of the key features of the Stahlbus bleeders is they feature an internal valve. If you want to pump fluid out from the hose, you can loosen this part by half a turn, and the valve acts as a one-way valve. So you can pump fluid out and it won't return, and air won't go in either. If you want to do a reverse bleed and inject into the valve from here, you can loosen it 1.5 turns and do that as well. So they should be very easy to use, and I'm keen to install them. So I'm going to be installing bleeders on the front brake, the clutch and the rear brake, but the method is the same for all three. So I'm just going to show the rear brake install. And the first step is to clean off any mud or dirt. I've already washed the bike, so it's pretty clean, but just wipe it off. And then take the dust cap off. It just pulls off. And then I like to use a cloth under the brake. When you disassemble it, some fluid will leak out. So if you have a cloth there, it catches that. And then the rear brake, you require a 12mm wrench. And just loosen off the banjo fitting. And then you want to disassemble it. And try to minimize any fluid leakage. That will minimize the amount of air that goes into the system. Then you can just lift it off. And you also want to replace the washers. The kit comes with new washers, so it's a good idea to replace those as they crush and distort. So I just put a new washer in, and then I get the bleeder and feed it through. And each of the bleeders comes with full instructions, which also includes the torque you have to fasten this to. So these particular banjo style ones, you need to torque to 12 Newton meters. So I'm going to do that now. And that's the install of the bleeder complete. Now I need to bleed out any air that I introduced. When I drain a rear brake system, I'm going to need to top up the master cylinder. So I'm going to take the cap off that so I can top it up. So I need a 21mm wrench to do that. Okay, and I've just noticed there's some dirt around the master cylinder where the cap was, so I'm going to carefully wipe that off so it doesn't go down inside. And then I'm going to add a little bit of brake fluid, so this is .4 brake fluid. When you're pumping fluid out, you don't want it to the master cylinder to get low. Okay, in the instructions it suggests that initially you apply a vacuum and open the valve 1.5 turns. In my case, I've hardly let any air in at all, so I don't really think that's necessary. So I'm just going to try putting a tube on to the valve, and I'll open it half a turn. and then try pumping out fluid. And you can see it's coming out now. And a little bit of air coming out. And I don't see any more bubbles right now. So we'll shut the valve off. And test the brake. So I found that by pumping the brake hard and then opening the valve half a turn and then pumps through some fluid and then close the valve and test the brake. And I found that doing that probably 3 or 4 times, I was able to get pretty much all of the air out of the system. Then once you've finished bleeding the system, the valve has a torque setting of 8 Newton meters, so be sure to tighten that to spec. When you finish bleeding the system, be sure to top off the master cylinder to the correct level. There's a line inside here, so it's pretty easy to check. And once that's okay, reinstall the cap. And there's an O-ring on here, so make sure the O-ring is installed correctly and that there's no dirt on the cap as well. And then just screw it in and then fasten it with a wrench. And then the last part of the install is to wipe off any spilt fluid and install the cap. Okay, so I've installed the front bleeder and the clutch bleeder. The front was extremely easy, hardly required any bleeding of the air at all because virtually none gets in. The clutch was a little bit more difficult though. You can see that there. I ended up reverse bleeding it because I couldn't get it out just by pumping from the clutch lever. So I used a syringe, opened up the valve 1.5 turns, and then pumped fluid in from the valve up to the master cylinder. And it bleeded pretty easily like that. Certainly these valves are really good compared to the stock ones, because even when you're reverse bleeding, the stock valve will leak fluid around the threads when you loosen it. These don't, so it makes a lot less mess and also introduces a lot less air. So highly recommended. They're a little pricey, but you can use them for a long time, so I think it's worth it in the long run.